Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. Well, I had a pretty great reading month in November. I read 12 things. One of the books was a 5-star that made me cry. Another was a 5-star that had me going off on Google and YouTube sprees to learn more about a subject. And I also read a feminist novella that had a gut punch for an ending. So let's talk about them. If you're new, please remember to like and subscribe, and that way you can see all of my bookish content. So I divide my reading into 3 categories: illustrated stuff, fiction, and nonfiction. So feel free to jump around and find what you like. Starting with illustrated stuff, I read Seance Tea Party by Reimena. This is an adorable, cozy middle grade graphic novel all about Laura. Laura is a junior high student and is really feeling like her friends are kind of leaving her behind. While she still wants to do childish and imaginative play, they are more interested in talking about boys and makeup and things that she's just not interested in yet. So we see she's really into spooky stuff and has a seance and is able to meet a ghost girl. And throughout the graphic novel, you get to see both of them kind of grow up together. And we find out what happened to the ghost girl and how she died. This was just a really sweet story, kind of a little bit sappy, but definitely adorable and was perfect for autumn. This is the only book I read this month that I'm disappointed in. I read Jonathan Abernathy, You Are Fine by Molly McGhee. This was compared to the TV show Severance on Apple, and I love that show. So when this book started out really slowly and I wanted to DNF, I thought, no, it took a while for Severance to get going. Eventually, it will be worth the payoff. And unfortunately, this isn't. So the story is about Jonathan. He is in so much debt, and one day he is offered a job as a dream auditor. In this dystopian future, companies can pay dream auditors to remove anything from their workers' dreams that are causing them anxiety or stress in order to make them more productive as people. So I can see where the comparison for Severance is, because this is definitely a satire of capitalism. But I think that that's where the comparison really ends. There's a romance in here that is kind of forced and doesn't really make sense. And there are a lot of questions that are brought up in the book that are never ultimately answered. And because of the dreams world that he has to go into, by the end, it just feels like a fever dream, which is not at all what I wanted. But, if you like really surreal type stories that don't answer all your questions, no, I can't recommend it. It just was a mess. It was not executed well at all. This had a lot of potential, a lot of interesting ideas, but it just didn't come together. So I gave it 2 stars. I picked up Kala by Colin Walsh. This was really good. This is kind of a genre mashup. This is part literary coming-of-age story and part mystery. So there are 2 timelines in this book. The first is when this group of friends, there are 3 boys and 3 girls. They are 15 and they hang out together and are incredibly close. And when they are 15, Kala disappears. And in the second timeline, when they're all 30, they kind of come back to their small Irish town for various reasons, and we learn basically what happened to Kala. There's also another mystery in the current timeline that may or may not be linked to Kala's disappearance. But I wouldn't call this a thriller, but I was definitely gripped, and I definitely kept turning the pages. I wanted to find out what happened. There are 2 reasons why I can't give this 5 stars. The first is there is some very triggering animal abuse and animal cruelty in this book, which is apparently one of my biggest triggers. And so I definitely didn't enjoy reading that. And the second is that not all of the ends are quite tied up. We get most of our questions answered, but there are a couple of things that I felt like they could have been a little bit more clear on. However, this is a debut novel, and I am blown away. It was really well written, and I'm going to keep my eye out for whatever he writes next, because this was really good. I gave it 4 stars. So I was eagerly anticipating Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree, the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and I was able to get a copy from my library. So in this prequel, we are following Viv. She's about 18 years old. She's an orc mercenary traveling with a group that she's working with, and she gets injured in a battle, and so they kind of leave her in this like small seaside town for her to recover while they continue to hunt the person that they're hunting. And it's it's kind of boring. There's not a lot for her to do, so she kind of walks around town and kind of stumbles across this bookshop and makes friends with the owner and offers to kind of help around the bookshop as well. She also meets a person who owns a bakery, and there's lots of delicious food descriptions in here as well. So if you like that in the first book, there's some in this book too. This book actually has a bit more plot than the first one, though. So in the beginning, she's just hanging out, making friends, reading books. But then something happens and plot furthers. I'm not going to say what it is because I think it was fun to watch it unfold. But if you wanted a little bit more plot from Legends and Lattes, this one definitely has it. And I will say the audiobook is the way to go. Travis Baldree is a professional audiobook narrator, and he does, like, each character gets their own voice, and it was stunning. I loved it. I actually think I liked it better than Legends and Lattes, which might be a bit controversial, but I thought it was really good. And if you haven't picked it up and you're kind of on the fence, I definitely think you should. So in the intro, I mentioned a super feminist novella with a gut punch ending. That would be Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Cho Nam-Joo. This starts out with a woman, and she is kind of worrying her husband. She keeps kind of impersonating other women in her life, talking as if she is that person. So she starts out impersonating her mom, and then she impersonates a college friend, and it kind of comes to a head when she's at her in-laws' house. It's the holidays, and she is with her husband, and they're at his family's house, and she impersonates her own mother and kind of chastises her in-laws and says, I wish my daughter would come visit me during the holidays, but you're taking up all of her time, and you're not being considerate of my family. And so the husband is like, okay, I need to get her help. That was incredibly rude. I can't believe she would call my parents out like that. So then we go back to her childhood, and we see how society has really preferred boys the whole time. And we go through her adolescence and through meeting her husband and the pressures she faces from her job and from her relatives about when she's going to have a baby. And it is just chock full of the misogyny that is very much present in real day Korea. And then we get that ending, and that ending made me so angry. And yeah, this has a very sparse writing style. So I thought I would have trouble connecting with this character, but I absolutely didn't. It was really good, and I'm giving it 4 stars. There is like current Korean statistics in here that kind of made it just feel a little bit less like a novel, which kind of lowered it a little bit in my opinion, but it was still really good, and it was a very powerful story. I then picked up The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is such an awesome philosophical book. So it opens up and we see this man, George, and he is overdosing. And the paramedics come and they say in order for him to have overdosed, he must have taken other people's meds off their med card. And so he has to go to voluntary therapy. I call it voluntary because it's more like an outpatient therapy. He has to go, and if he refuses, then they'll put him kind of in an institution. So he goes and he meets his psychiatrist, Dr. Haber. And he tells Dr. Haber, the reason I'm ODing on drugs is because I don't want to dream. I'm scared of my dreams. Sometimes I'll dream something and it comes true. It reshapes reality. And he calls them effective dreams. Dr. Haber is like, I will use some technology to help you get into a dream state here under controlled circumstance, and you'll know that you have nothing to fear. He just doesn't believe him, and he's like, we'll just practice having you dream in the office. Of course, after that first dream, though, reality changes, and Dr. Haber decides he's going to use George, basically try and wield him like a tool to reshape reality for the better. However, there are a ton of unintended consequences. And I have a quote that I'd like to share that I don't think gives too much away. George says, "What kind of monsters have you dredged up out of my unconscious mind in the name of peace?" So I thought this was really good. Because it's short, I can't really tell you what else happens. But there was definitely some interesting philosophical ideas, including eugenics, which I thought were interesting in the way that they were discussed. I will say I am only giving this 4 stars instead of 5 because the ending felt a bit unresolved and a little bit confusing. But overall, this was amazing and I would highly recommend. My last fiction book that I read in November was A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicoll. Buddy read this. And this is a middle grade story focused on 11-year-old Addie. She is autistic and she's having a hard time at school because not only is she being bullied by another kid, but her teacher is incredibly impatient and just doesn't seem to know how to work with Addie and be patient with some of her quirks. So during a history lesson, the teacher starts talking about how women who were different and thought possibly witches were executed in their town. And Addie really gets enamored with the story. She really relates to them because they were considered different and they were harmed because of it. And people don't seem to care. And so she decides that she wants these women to be remembered. She wants to get a memorial or a plaque. And she strives to make that happen. She also has a really close, wonderful relationship with her older sister, who also has autism. And I feel like this was a really accessible way to learn about autism if you don't know about like overstimulation and meltdowns and burnout. Like this was a really easy way to learn about it, as well as being a phenomenal story. I am definitely going to pick up more from Elle McNicoll in the future. The other buddy read I read in November was Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino. I buddy read this with Audrey from Audrey Approved. This focuses on the many different types of food and how through colonialism and capitalism and creating monocultures, we really are not diversifying our food any longer, which puts them at risk. Because humans are trying to make things more uniform and like easy for mass production, it's unfortunately putting them at risk for disease and drought. There were also parts talking about people who are basically trying to save these foods from going extinct by either saving seeds or by harvesting small crops of these like rare plants. It definitely had some really interesting points, but the writing is incredibly dry. So she and I agreed it only gets 3 stars. Another nonfiction book I read was Too Much Is Not Enough by Andrew Rannells. He is best known, at least by me, as a Broadway actor in The Book of Mormon, and he had a television role on the HBO show Girls. So this is his memoir, and he starts with talking about growing up in Nebraska, and then when he was 19, he moved to New York City to try and make it as an actor. However, I was disappointed with this because those two things that I know him from, Girls and the Book of Mormon, he doesn't even talk about. He talks about getting his first Broadway role in Hairspray as a member of the chorus, and that's where he ends. So, I mean, and this is definitely not very long, so I felt like he could have included more. I definitely liked his voice, and I thought some of what he said was really important. I just felt like it was a little bit incomplete. I also read the Britney Spears memoir, The Woman in Me. I did a single review of that, so I will link that in the cards and in the description below. But if you don't want to watch the whole thing, I enjoyed it. I found the bits about being under conservatorship really interesting. And yeah, well worth the read, I'd recommend. So the 5-star book that had me Googling and YouTubing all sorts of stuff was Cultish by Amanda Montell. This book talks about what you would normally think of as cults, like religious and doomsday cults, as well as other things that are cult-like or cult-ish, like MLMs and health and fitness programs that have kind of this intense following. She talked about how important language is in cults, partly to create an in-group with their own vocabulary and their own words, but also she talked about thought-terminating cliches, phrases that they would say anytime they would get any pushback or would try and be like, maybe this is not what I should be doing. They would talk about different phrases that would basically nip that in the bud. So, for example, with the QAnon cult, their phrases are trust the plan and do your research. This was maddening and illuminating and just really a fascinating nonfiction to read. I think the most impactful part for me was when she was talking about the Jonestown cult and how the leader, Jim Jones, created a death tape. Basically, he recorded himself while they were all mass killing themselves. And I'm going to read you that quote and then what she says about it because I found that to be the most interesting bit. So in the tape, Jim Jones says, "If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace. We have been betrayed. We have been so terribly betrayed. I've never lied to you. The best testimony we can make is to leave this GD world. I am speaking as a prophet today. I wouldn't sit up in this seat and talk so serious if I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't want to see you go through this hell no more. No more, no more, no more. Death is not to be feared. Do not fear. It's a friend. It's a friend. Let's get gone, let's get gone, let's get gone. Death is 1,000,000 times more preferable than 10 more days of this life. Hurry, my children. Sister, go knowing you. No more pain, no more pain. Free at last." And she says, this death tape is a poem, a curse, a mantra, a betrayal, a haunting, and proof of language's lethal power. So I found that really fascinating. Also, along the cultish lines, she talked about like health and fitness gurus and how they really are taking advantage of people who are ill and desperate for any kind of thing that might help heal them. And that really angered me because as a person who has chronic illness and disability, I know just how desperate someone can feel, and they are willing to try anything, pay anything, whatever they can to get out of pain. And to see people peddling basically snake oil, you know, something that is not scientifically proven to work or help, it just disgusted me out there that there are people who are willing to just take advantage of people. And anyway, I found this book ridiculously impressive and interesting, and I've already added her new book. She's got another book coming out next year called The Age of Magical Overthinking, and I can't wait to pick it up because she writes in such a compelling way. The last book and my favorite nonfiction I read was The Anthropocene, reviewed by John Green. This is the book that made me cry. So in the beginning, in the introduction, John Green says that he started out writing reviews, and he would write short reviews about books. And this was kind of before the 1 to 5 star scale. And so he decides he's going to review things that are happening during the Anthropocene, which is the current time period that humanity is in. And he basically starts during the 2020 lockdown. And he writes essays and ratings and reviews of different things. And some are just light and silly, like the Indy 500 or his love for Diet Dr. Pepper or sunsets. And then he also talks about the pandemic and loneliness and being scared for your health. And he has had a couple of really challenging health issues as well. I just felt what he was able to do to be in that moment where everything was changing and we were basically in an unknown, and for him to just really appreciate the good things. And he talks about sunsets and like his favorite song, and just it's essays and reviews of different things, but it's also kind of part memoir because he talks about different parts of his life and what he's thankful for now. And I know it's probably not going to hit the same for everybody. But I thought this was amazing and wonderful. And I've already put it on my Christmas wish list because I need to annotate it. I need to reread it and annotate it. And yeah, it was just phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. Those are the books I read in the month of November. What did you read? Did you participate in Nonfiction November? Let's have a chat down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.